in an unlikely scenario, which is technically possible, Putin will accept some kind of a ceasefire. That ceasefire will last only until he decides that he's ready to strike again, and so on. Because there is nothing which will enforce his promises to end the war.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars we end. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip. We'll own it. Know that China is doing very poorly right now. I just saw some reports coming out, and I don't want that to happen to China. You're gambling with World War III. I was saved by God to make America great again.
I'm Roland Oliphant, and this is Battlelines, the Telegraph's foreign policy and defence podcast. It's Friday, the 15th of August, 2025. Later today, or sometime tomorrow, depending on where you are in the world, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will sit down together in Alaska. It will be the first meeting of the Russian and an American president since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began 3 years ago, and the implications are momentous. Will it be peace in our time, as Donald Trump promises, or, as Ukraine and its European allies fear, another Munich 1938, a carving up of Ukraine, and by extension the world, as dangerous and destructive as that infamous agreement? Ukraine has been excluded from the summit in Alaska. But how do people there feel about what is being discussed? And a man well placed to explain is Andriy Zagorodnyuk, a former Ukrainian defence minister, who has been working on a theory of victory since the war began. I started by asking him how people in Kiev feel about the meeting in Alaska.
We don't expect anything good, frankly speaking. People are extremely nervous about that here, extremely nervous, because we know what's our government position, and frankly speaking, we support our government position because for a number of reasons I can explain. But we also know that Putin will try his best. And we know that Putin is always preparing very well for meetings, so he will think about every little detail, and essentially he will make an impression on Trump, and Trump would be saying that was a fantastic meeting, and so on and so on. Of course, it may go differently, but the chances that that's going to happen are very, very high. I remember last time they met, that was in Helsinki, I think, or somewhere, and Trump was just singing songs to Putin and just saying like how great he was and how fantastic. And then if Trump agrees over our head about our future, that's going to be very bad, because most likely he's not agree about anything good. All of that was communicated many times to his administration. We see publicly only like fractions of what has been said. But from what I know, there's been a ton of like calls and messages back and forth. Also, for that matter, European leaders, including UK leader, they communicated to Trump, but I'm not sure what came out of that.
So the BBC World Service just had a former Russian deputy foreign minister on. He said he thinks Putin isn't looking for any specifics here. Like the Russian goal is to get, he said, a kind of oral blessing from Trump to pursue peace according to Russian terms.
So he can either push his agenda, like very specific points. That's one scenario. So we have two model meetings, let's call it this way, two model meetings which took place before. So one was like pretty detailed, and that was a meeting in Normandy format, December 9th, 2019. When that's the first and the last time you met Zelensky. So for that meeting, they were preparing like a detailed memo and so on. I didn't go according to the plan, but at least that was an approach, to strike a deal with some kind of terms. Second option was Putin's meeting with Biden in Geneva, which ended with just general statements, but was mainly a kind of a projection of confidence of Putin's status, that he is like a super high-level leader, a global leader, which needs to be counted with, and so on and so on. That kind of worked very much towards him.
Everyone's talking about what kind of peace might be imposed if it happened, and all these models have been kicked around for ages, right? The Finland scenario, the Korea scenario.
Yeah, but be careful, because it's not going to bring peace. Because Finland scenario, Korean scenario, all them included one big element is that the Russia at that time in Finland or North Korea, they did not have chances to move further. Basically, they were stuck. Russia is sort of stuck, but not like really. They still feel that they have opportunity to move further. But Putin is not going to forget about the idea of destroying Ukraine at all. There is no single indicator that he is planning to do that. More than that, Europe absolutely believes that there is like a risk from Russia to Europe itself. So Europe will be preparing for defending against Russia. So it's militarization of Europe. It's definitely militarization of Ukraine. So essentially, this is more if in an unlikely scenario, which is technically possible, Putin will accept some kind of a ceasefire. That ceasefire will last only until he decides that he's ready to strike again and so on. Because there is nothing which will enforce his promises to end the war. America is not going to guarantee Ukrainian security. Europe, first of all, cannot do that. Secondly, is also not going to do that. But more importantly, it cannot do this. It doesn't have capability to provide security guarantees. It can provide some kind of assurance, some bullshit stuff like reassurance forces and all that stuff. But this is not security guarantees. This is nothing. In terms of like deterrence, you know. So essentially we're talking about the United States being the only country in the world which can potentially provide security guarantees to Ukraine. But it's not going to do that because it's thinking about China. War with China and so on and so on. Out of many other things, they clearly don't want to do that and they cannot do that. So nobody's going to provide security guarantees to Ukraine. That's a huge difference from war in Korea. Because in war in Korea, United States guaranteed the safety of South Korea. And that was a major deterrent for North Korea. So it's clearly not going to be the situation here. And the promise, like, even if it's signed by agreement or anything, a promise which cannot be enforced in case of Russia is nothing. I mean, if it's unenforceable, it's literally nothing. He will walk away from this like in no time. Yeah, so essentially, if Zelensky could give Putin the rights to the left, like swap lands, whatever, he wouldn't be able to say, okay, we're doing this, and we're absolutely certain that the war ends. No, he cannot say that. All he can say is we're doing this, and then we'll see what happens. And that doesn't make sense.
Okay. What you said about Korea also applies, of course, to West Germany and Berlin during the Cold War, with that big American presence and everything. I was wondering if your, the kind of strategy for victory you described in your paper recently is, in a way, it's a way of getting around that because it achieves the same thing, right? It freezes the line. It creates a Berlin Wall, but without American help and without a ceasefire or a peace deal. I mean, is it a way of achieving the same thing in a way?
Yeah, pretty much. Except that it doesn't require Ukraine to do this very, very politically suicidal act of swapping lands, which, by the way, there is no way Zelensky is going to do that. Because for him, it's extremely unpopular idea in Ukraine. And so it's not like Zelensky not going to do this because it's going to be unpopular. It is unpopular because people intuitively understand that it's not going to bring peace. That's the logic here. So Zelensky is not going to do this, not because people will say, oh, you're doing everything wrong. No. It's because he understands that people will say that because they understand, and he understands. And it's not going to bring any peace at all. It's just like Russia would spend another $1 million on capturing Donbass. Now Trump suggests that we give it for free. That's how we see this situation.
What do you make of what's happening in Donbass, this breakthrough to Dobrophilia? And
that's what Putin wants to do before the meeting. Especially he kind of added a bit of a push in order to show that he still can do something. But it's not like strategic breakthrough at all.
You don't think so?
No, I know so. I read a lot, this whole morning I was reading the internal reports and so on. There are some people getting in, but most likely they will all die eventually, pretty soon.
Okay. Because, on the map it looks worrying, and I suppose that's the idea, right?
Kind of worrying, but in reality, at least from what we see right now, unless we're missing something, It doesn't look like a strategic breakthrough at all. It looks like a breakthrough. Look, the density of the people sitting in trenches is quite low.
Yeah.
You cannot put for all these legs many people who, and even if there is like a one guy per meter, if you apply like 500 guys in that area, they will break through the line, right? So breaking through the line is not that difficult. What is difficult is to answer the question, and then what? When from all sides the reserves will be just attacking those people who break through it. They will kill them all eventually.
Okay, and your answer is Ukraine has sufficient reserves to do that, and
Yes.
so these poor Russian soldiers are basically doomed, and Putin's just
They will
sent them.
most likely eventually be dispersed, and they will. I don't see them surviving, frankly speaking. Like most of them, some will survive, but most of them, for them, is a kind of suicidal mission. The effect is to show like the world, and then it will be amplified by journalists, by propaganda, that Russia can do the breakthroughs, and that's actually winning the war. And you can see, Orban just said that Russia is winning the war just yesterday.
The question is about Kramatorsk and Slavyansk and the defensive belt. You don't think that's suddenly in more danger than it was, in a way?
It's always in a danger, frankly speaking, but I don't think it's in a significantly more danger than it was like a week ago. Let me put it this way.
Yeah, okay.
We'll see what happens, of course, but that's what I get from the data which we could see. Maybe we're mistaken, but I don't think so, at least at the moment.
Former Ukrainian Defence Minister Andriy Zagorodnyuk there. We wanted to speak to somebody who had actually fought in the war and had literally bled for the land that Donald Trump is now talking about trading with Vladimir Putin. Max Kuzmenko fought as a private and then lance corporal in the Ukrainian assault infantry until he was wounded in the autumn of 2023. Since returning to civilian life, he stayed in touch with many of his old comrades. I asked him what he made of the talk of a ceasefire.
It is clear that Russia will not give back any territory which is already written in their constitution. It's still shocking for me to hear from the President of the United States about easily amending constitution by the President of another country. Obviously, either his team don't brief him on basic legislative actions, or he is just simply corrupt to his core, because any country which has a constitution has its limits in relation to wartime period. And yet he actually shockingly says that why Zelensky can't change some provisions of constitution. That's completely bullshit for a democratic country itself, and it's completely bullshit in general, just in terms of logic, in terms of basic understanding of the law in any country. So I personally don't believe that there will be any big agreements. I believe there can be agreement as during the previous talks on swapping the prisoners of war. I truly hope that there will be some goodwill actions on the children which were stolen from Ukraine. I believe there are tens of thousands of children. And recently, just a month ago, previous months, Russia introduced actual website where you can pick a specific child and just take it. It's him or her. It's just insane. I mean, the world goes insane, and nobody takes action. So to sum up, I don't believe there will be any truly meaningful agreement. Especially, I don't see how there can be one if there is no representative of Ukraine there. So it will be just talking between two autocratic leaders about how they can deal with this whole war in Eastern Europe. That's all. And in Ukraine, from what I see from the military, people in the military who post their thoughts in social media, specifically in Twitter, that they don't believe in any agreement. They would rather continue fighting because they don't believe in any ceasefire. There may be ceasefire for a month, maybe, tops. But then some unit, rather from Russian side will receive order to fire, or there will be just some firing from jarheads. So the only section of Ukrainians which I see positive comments on like ceasefire from are the people who flew from Ukraine or are actually ignoring or rather avoiding their military duty. Those are who cry social media the most. But it's rather annoying, whining than actual argumentative position.
Yeah. I mean, the official position of the Ukrainian government now is that they would accept an immediate unconditional ceasefire along the current line of contact. I mean, it obviously seems that Vladimir Putin wouldn't accept that. He wants more than that. But is that something that you would feel okay with? I just mean that the conversation has moved so far from there was that time when you were fighting in the counteroffensive and there still seemed hope that, everything could be liberated. And now it seems like the conversation has moved on and the conversation is about keeping as much of Ukraine as possible rather than winning back what's been lost. I mean, how do you feel about the progress of the war and the situation Ukraine is in now?
Currently, I don't know any person who believes in some meaningful counter-offensive operations like Kharkiv operation, for example. So truly, there is a strong need in holding the line as it is. It would be helpful for Ukraine to make a few things. First, fortifications, then looking around for where we need replacements, where we need additional troops to shook the commanding officers who are actually lying to their superiors about how the things are going in their section of front line. So we truly need that. And the commanders, heads of the regiments or commanders of brigades who I truly admire, they are also talking that they would be interested in a ceasefire for at least a month. It would be helpful for them to dig in more, to help with the logistics. So it's completely just a military action. Nobody actually believes that there will be some peace after the ceasefire. But yes, you are correct. There is no actual real talking about a big counter-offensive. We need to be in a fully defensive mode for now, because we have a clear problems in our Pokrovsk region and also adjacent regions to the east and northeast. And due to some commanders lying to their superiors and due to the chaos in management from the battalion level to the brigade level in this region, we saw the consequences in actual dropping of the front line in this region. But a few days ago, the 1st Army Corps, which recently was Azov Brigade, now they are 1st Army Corps, they moved to this region and they actually stabilized it. From what I hear, there are very good results in counteroffensives, local counteroffensives there.
Right. Okay. Because that was the narrative, right? There was a suddenly alarming, very successful infiltration by the Russians.
The noise was that the front line is down, and the enemy have a good opportunity to advance and to outflank a large portion of the territory. But another message is what I see and hear is that those were a large number of small groups of Russians who just successfully infiltrated the positions, but they are not a full plan. It was just a success of the Russian ongoing meat grinder. So they have almost no communication. Those are just groups which lay low in some buildings, in some shelters, and they are waiting for something.
That was Max Kuzmenko, a former Ukrainian soldier.
Hey, it's me, Venetia Rainey. We've just released a mini-series about the rise of China's military, and I think you'll really like it. It's a deep dive into the strengths and weaknesses of the People's Liberation Army under leader Xi Jinping, and what it all means for Taiwan. As the US pivots to the Indo-Pacific, understanding China's armed forces has never been more important. You can listen to all 3 episodes now. Just click the link in the show notes or search Battlelines China wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. The Telegraph's Dominic Nicholls and Connor Stringer are in Alaska to follow the talks. Earlier, I spoke to them. I started by asking them to describe the scene ahead of the meeting.
It's 4:45 in the morning, and it's still pitch black, although we are in the middle of a wood. So dawn might be starting to break. I flew in from London. We went north about. It was wonderful. We came over Greenland. I don't think we went literally over the North Pole, but over the top, as they say, and then dropped down. So we came in to Alaska from the north. It was amazing. It was pretty covered in cloud, but there was a very large lump which turned out to be Mount McKinley, just off the left-hand wing, which is where I was sitting. So it was lovely, and there's big rivers, there's huge salmon rushing at the moment. I don't know quite what the verb is for salmon, but they're all in flow. Due to go fishing on Saturday. But yeah, we're here. Seemingly so is the rest of the world, because we couldn't get a hotel room. Couldn't get a hotel room for love nor money. Connor will tell you in a moment how apparently the White House as well was struggling for hotel rooms. I did the only sensible thing, which was to hire an enormous Winnebago, which is where we speak to you from now. So we're in the Mini Winnie. We're at a campsite just outside Anchorage, up on the Eagle River. It's absolutely delightful here. Early on Thursday, I'm getting a bit twisted, but I think it's Thursday morning here. So nothing happened yet, but make no mistake, this summit has already started in the wider realm.
How easy is it about moving around? I mean, when over the years, whenever I've always known when Vladimir Putin is showing up in my kind of area, because suddenly a security detail appears and you're not allowed to move anywhere, even if the toilet is just over there, half a day before he even appears. Lockdown, police dogs, sniffer dogs, everything else. Is Anchorage crawling with Secret Service people and so on, or could you almost think that nothing was happening there?
I would ordinarily say, no, it's not crawling with Secret Service agents. You would expect not to see them. However, the US do things slightly differently in that you sometimes can see these guys cutting around in the days beforehand. It will almost certainly be on government property and on a military base. That's the easiest to secure. So in that regard, there almost certainly won't be anything seen in Anchorage in terms of road restrictions. Extremely unlikely that any of the delegations are going to be going downtown doing any sort of press calls or anything like that. So I don't think there'll be any change at all to day-to-day life in Anchorage. We've yet to hear where we have to be. We know where the press centre is going to be, and we're assuming that's where we're going to be told to meet tomorrow, to get on a load of buses and taken to wherever the meeting is. It won't just be pitching up on your own in your hire car, in your hire Winnebago type thing. Yeah, we're waiting to hear, but no obvious restrictions in place at all yet.
I think this is a good point for us to say that, look, for the news on this as it unfolds, listeners, please do tune into Ukraine the latest, because I think you're having a special edition as everything unfolds. So that's where to get the daily updates, the real as it happens stuff from Dom and Connor on the ground. But I was wondering, actually, if you two, for the benefits of Battlelines listeners, put this into a broader context here. And forgive me for the broadness of this question, but there's lots of ways you could say, it's significant. It's the first meeting between a Russian and US president since the full-scale invasion, so on and so forth. On the other hand, there's been a lot of vagueness about the actual agenda. There's little sign that the Russians have really moved their position at all. It's difficult to work out what might come out of it. What is this, really? What is the significance of this moment, in your view?
For me, Roland, I think Putin wants to get four things out of this, and he's pretty much got two in the bag straight away. So number one, he wants a photograph of him shaking hands with Donald Trump. Number two, he wants to give the impression that this is business as usual between two global leaders, and that the annoying, inconvenient thing in Ukraine is just a sort of a sideshow. He's going to talk about mineral deals. He's going to talk about increased research and economic development in the Alaska region. So he wants to make it sound as if the US and Russia have a normal relationship, and the whole Ukraine thing is just a slight annoyance that has to be dealt with, but it really isn't the central game. Number three, if he can get any further, he wants de facto recognition of Russian ownership of those four eastern oblasts in Ukraine. Now, they held most of Luhansk Oblast, but the other three, they've got Russian forces on 75%. So there's still a huge piece of land in each of those three that Russia does not hold. So he wants to try and get de facto recognition of owning all four of those. That would be a massive win for him. And then finally, number 4, the one thing he really wants to come away from this summit with, as well as the photograph, which he's going to get, he wants sanctions relief. So if he can come away with some form of sanctions relief from the US, then he will be absolutely cock-a-hoop. That's my interpretation. But I mean, Connor broke the exclusive story yesterday about what Putin might be looking for with the minerals deal. So he's probably better placed to offer a slightly different view.
I did want to actually ask you about that, because I suppose what I really wanted to get from you was Dom's given it a sense of what he thinks Vladimir Putin wants to get out of this. What are the Americans going into this wanting, and what's the connection with these incentives that you report that they're going to offer him?
Trade book, Donald Trump carrot and stick approach, isn't it? I think there is a genuine want for peace. Donald Trump's America First agenda, the America First agenda that got him elected and back into the White House, promised to end these forever wars, and he is facing mounting criticism and pushback within from his most loyal supporters about the Ukraine war is still ongoing, and the various associations with Zelensky, many of which are now desperate to see this come to an end. I think these incentives they're three-pronged, as I mentioned. This minerals deal could be very lucrative for Donald Trump, offering security guarantee aside, the case that require a lot of resources that America can provide to access those, similar to what we saw with the deal with Ukraine. The minerals deal the opening up Alaska to Russia to be able to use its resources are, of course, lucrative for both parties. And crucially, the lifting of sanctions, particularly these aerospace sanctions that have really hampered Russia and its aircraft, so much so that swathes now have been rendered pretty useless and desperate for repair, will very much help American companies. I think the majority of the aircraft owned by Russian airlines, I think up to 700, which are actually manufactured by Boeing, of course, the massive American airplane manufacturer, which will only incentivize it and help them if Russia come back for parts and the various manufacturing processes that you need that currently Russia have been cut off from. So it's really a three-pronged approach, but we must remember, Roland, I will stress this, is that while Donald Trump is perhaps on the surface saying that, warning of the consequences that Putin faces if he doesn't come here with an open mind, wanting peace, is this massive sanctions bill that is currently being fought through Congress spearheaded by Lindsey Graham, a very hawkish Republican who is primed and ready to push this kind of bill that would whack Russia with huge sanctions, and crucially those that do business with it with even more, that Donald Trump has got in his back pocket here, that I suspect we'll start seeing him ramp up and using that stick if Putin doesn't pay ball over the next 48 hours.
I was wondering if I could just follow up on that. At the beginning, as Donald Trump was making his way through his second election campaign and finally won the election and moved to the White House, there was lots of discussion about things that he was saying, that J.D. Vance was saying and so on, that was pointing to this dream of a grand bargain with Russia, with the idea of carving the world into spheres of influence in order to contain China. Can you give us an idea of whether there is a deeper American strategic thought about this decision, underlying this decision to basically blindside their allies with this summit that seems to violate all of the things that their closest allies were trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think you might be over-analysing it there, Roland. You're not the only one. I think everyone's doing that. Everyone's looking for deeper meaning in this, because it could mean so many different things, and it could mean one glaring thing that's totally contradictory to the stated message from the White House at the moment, which is that China is the pacing threat that they're trying to work against. So if China is the big threat, such that they don't want to arm Ukraine with a load of American weapons that they might need in a future Pacific conflict, etc., etc. They don't want to lean in diplomatically and expend political capital trying to sort Ukraine with a just and lasting peace. If they just want out so they can focus on China, they're absolutely going around this the wrong way, because if you allow territories to be redrawn by force in a post-Second World War environment, then China's going to be looking at that and going, fantastic, we're game on, lads, green light for Taiwan. So if China is the pacing threat that the US is really concerned about, the fight for Taiwan, the fight to stand up against China, the fight to stand up against China attempting to overturn the post-Second World War security environment starts now with Ukraine. So I'm absolutely amazed that is not made clearer to Donald Trump. And these ideas that, oh, he's doing this because of that, and then 3 moves down the line, he's going to do this. He's not playing some massive geopolitical game of risk. I think he's taking decisions very short term and with no clear thread through to a coherent strategy at all.
Connor, is that your sense from being in Washington?
I think somewhat. I think you do make a good point about China as well, and this kind of perhaps underlying theme of wanting to isolate Xi Jinping from all the deals that Donald Trump is going out there to make. We look at the deals, the trade deals in particular, that have been made by the president, with even Britain handing out US vetoes to Chinese investment, agreeing not to take a certain amount of Chinese steel, and some other deals across the country doing quite similar, all giving America basically the power and the freedom to try and isolate China from being this kind of dominant world power. I would be very surprised if that's the same approach that he would be taking with Vladimir Putin, given the close relationship between China and Russia. But I think that there is for all of the analysis that we can do, I would probably and do quite believe that there is a lot of political pressure for Donald Trump back home to get peace. And he does very much see himself as this kind of divine peacemaker, and has almost set it upon himself since coming into the White House to make these peace deals and become the peacemaker in chief. There is, I think, a large part of that is that I think he really wants this Nobel Peace Prize, and he was, very famously, and much to his annoyance, denied it in the years past, and those around him quite sincerely get his ear and say he deserves it. You can see a host of countries, including Netanyahu, now publicly saying he deserves it. So Trump's a man who, when people say, he obviously likes his ego stroking, and he likes the idea of kind of the public courting that he deserves this thing, and kind of spurs him on to go on and do it some more. While I think that perhaps there is a deal at hand, and Trump will, of course, will want some kind of economic benefit for America. That's the whole reason why we have America basically brokering peace in a war that they have absolutely nothing to do with. There is obviously something to be gained for Donald Trump, and that's what he sees. But there is an element, I think, a real peace element to this, and this idea that he sees himself as this, perhaps a Nobel Peace Prize winning leader, and a title that I think he quite desperately wants.
Dom, I was wondering, putting this in the context of the course of the war, you've obviously been, as many of us, following the war from day one. You've been running Ukraine the latest, you're on Ukraine the latest almost every day since. You've been following the ups and downs of the war. It's been through so many phases, from the initial kind of general sense that Ukraine was doomed, and then to a sense that Russia was on its knees, and that Vladimir Putin was facing defeat and possible overthrow. Then there was a sense that maybe Russia could be swept back into the sea by a blitzkrieg, which failed, and now we're back in a place where Ukraine seems to be very much on the back foot. Bearing all that in mind, and also bearing in mind how the kind of messaging, I suppose, has changed from the West. We used to be told that Putin must fail, that he is an international pariah, that this is all terribly unacceptable. Now we're at a point where he is being welcomed by an American president who is offering him bribes, apparently, to end the war on terms that seem fairly favourable to him. I'm wondering whether, since this is where the conversation is at, it's time for the West to admit to itself that it has failed, that in a way the West has lost this war, that it was unable to help an ally, and that all of its declared goals it's been proven unable to achieve.
If the war in Ukraine ends today, frozen along the line of contact, the front line, if you like, today, and there's a nasty, fudgy, unhappy peace that endures for decades, like North-South Korea, like Cyprus, something like that, then we will be debating for years, who's won, who's lost. On the one hand, you could say every day that Ukraine exists as a sovereign, independent nation able to make its own decisions is a defeat for Russia. You could also say Vladimir Putin clearly not being an international pariah on the world stage and still able to go and visit the US president on US soil and shake his hand is a victory for him. You're going to debate left, right, and Chelsea, but let's have a look at how we got here from the West perspective. On day one of the full-scale invasion, February the 24th, 2022, the 4 things that the West had to do was, number one, support Ukraine diplomatically, politically, with humanitarian aid and with just simple financial aid. Number 2, impose a cost on Russia to show that actions have consequences. Number 3, possibly most importantly, avoid nuclear war, avoid World War III. And number 4, keep the NATO alliance together. And none of those 4 things were absolutely guaranteed in those first frantic weeks, first frantic months, if you like, since the full-scale invasion. They were all absolutely skating on ice. So the West, I'm very critical of Europe's position on this, or lack of position, lack of leadership, lack of stepping up, etc., etc. But I might be talking from a sort of gilded cage, if you like. And if you look at those 4 things, support Ukraine, impose a cost on Russia, ensure that you don't have a nuclear exchange, and keep the NATO alliance together, what we see today might just be the ugly reality of what that looks like in the 21st century with Donald Trump in power again, etc., etc. So I can't bash the West absolutely on it.
Say that at the meeting, Europe and Ukraine's worst nightmare comes true. Say it ends up as a Yalta, a Munich. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin agree on a plan to effectively enforce a peace on Ukraine without security guarantees, carve it up to Russia's satisfaction. Were that to happen, and it sounds like it's well within the realms of possibility, I'm not saying it will or not, what would we have to come to terms with if that were the case?
Yeah, first and foremost, if you were Ukrainian, you're going to have to come to terms with it. You're going to have some Russian neighbours inside some former territory that used to be yours. And I think you're right that this is very much perhaps is turning into those worst fears. Everyone I speak to in Europe, particularly the last 2 days, are saying that any kind of discussions, and they are worried about it, particularly because it's so one-on-one and they haven't got a single European representation there, but any agreement must be presented in a manner that's not seen to reward Vladimir Putin. And that, for them, is the bottom line and the key point they want to get across. And as you say, unfortunately, it seems like their fears of Trump and Putin negotiating above Zelensky's head is very much coming through. The White House all week have been tempering expectations, saying that this is a listening exercise for the president, and it's merely nothing more than perhaps a fact-finding mission for him to go over and determine, as the president said, within 2 minutes, if Putin is actually serious about peace. But now we've got Moscow coming out saying there's going to be a working lunch. It seems to be a lot more of a longer affair. There's going to be a delegation from Russia, quite a heavy-hitting delegation as well, including Sergei Lavrov. This is becoming, and it seems quite quickly to me, perhaps in my opinion, much more a detail-oriented mission than a 1 hour, let's sit down and see if you're serious about peace and we'll go about our way, I think, as the days go on.
Yes, but I would counter. That's exactly what they want you to think, that Russia is putting forward a heavy-hitting delegation here because they want to say, at last, we are dealing with grown-ups. We haven't had to go through those charades in Turkey with this ridiculous Ukrainian delegation. Ukraine isn't even a country anyway, so why do we need to talk to them? But finally, we have the United States, so we all said. So that's the narrative they want to push. So yes, they're going to put a heavy-hitting delegation, not because they are serious about peace, but because they are serious about wanting to be seen on the stage with Donald Trump. But to answer your question that you asked a moment ago, Roland, what will the world have to get used to if this is a fudgy peace? I think the world's going to have to get used to a very changed security landscape whereby Russia and Ukraine can both be winners from this, for the reasons I said earlier. Putin will say, there you go, I've stopped NATO expansion and I've given those Nazis a bloody nose and it's not going to stop here, blah, 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 blah. But Ukraine, as I say, every day that Ukraine is an independent sovereign nation able to take its own decisions is a victory for Ukraine. So I think the world's going to have to get used to an idea whereby you can have a massive international war with all the risks accompanied that I mentioned earlier on, and both sides can come out as winners, brackets, and losers too. I'm talking fairly glibly. It's not a great situation for the world right now, but I think there is a realistic possibility of some form of fudged peace right now in Ukraine, and that will be debate over about what it means. But there is a chance that the actual fighting right now could stop. As for what comes next, we don't know.
Telegraph Associate Editor Dominic Nicholls and Deputy US Editor Connor Stringer speaking to me there from Anchorage. That's all for this week. We'll be back on Monday with our usual updates. Until then, that was Battlelines. Goodbye. Battlelines is an original podcast from The Telegraph created by David Knowles. If you appreciated this show, please consider following Battlelines on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review as it helps others find the show. To stay on top of all our news, subscribe to The Telegraph, sign on to our Dispatches newsletter, or listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine, for latest. You can also get in touch directly by emailing battlelines@telegraph.co.uk or contact us on X. You can find our handles in the show notes. This episode of Battle Lines was hosted by me, Roland Oliphant, and produced by Max Bauer. The executive producer is Louisa Wells.